One of my favorite topics to talk about as a Spanish learner is having conversations in Spanish. Now, I love talking about this topic because it is really fun to have conversations in Spanish, but not only that, I'm very proud of all the progress that I've made because I went from not having any conversations in Spanish with native Spanish speakers to having conversations with native Spanish speakers very frequently. But this was no easy journey and many times it was very uncomfortable. But that's why in this video, I want to share with you some tips that have helped me have fluent Spanish conversations. First things first, let's define what a fluent Spanish conversation is. So I don't know exactly what the linguistic definition would be, but in my case, for this video, to make it as simple as possible, I see it more as just being able to continue a conversation in Spanish without having a lot of big breaks. For example, you say something in Spanish, but then you don't say anything for 30 seconds or a minute. So you're having a consistent exchange between you and a native Spanish speaker, or any Spanish speaker for that matter. One big tip that has helped me to have fluent Spanish conversations is asking many questions. So another big challenge that we face when we're having conversations in Spanish is trying to figure out what the heck to talk about. And since conversations in Spanish can be quite spontaneous, I don't know exactly what the conversation is going to be about until I'm asking all these questions. For example, one time I was getting my car worked on and the mechanic was a Spanish speaker. So this was a really good opportunity to have a conversation, but about cars. But in this case, I didn't really know, and actually still don't know, many vocabulary words about cars. But anyway, I asked him as many questions that popped into my head during this conversation about the issue that was happening with my car. So I again didn't have all the vocabulary, but I did the best that I could to ask questions. And of course, the more questions that I asked, the more questions that he was answering. So we had this nice little exchange going there. But again, because I was trying to continue the conversation as much as possible by asking questions and doing the best that I could. Some of these tips are in my Spanish conversation blueprint. So download this PDF if you want to see these tips in a written form. And that is linked down below in the description box. Also, check out my Spanish vocabulary blueprint and my Spanish resource kit. And both of those are also linked down in the description box. I have to say that I was struggling to think of different things to say, so that's why it's also very important to be creative when you are having conversations in Spanish. If you're in a situation like this in a conversation when you are struggling to think about what you want to say, one thing that can help you to still try to maintain this fluent Spanish conversation is by using filler words and using filler phrases. These filler words and phrases can change depending on what you just heard as well. In my conversations, I try to say things like, o sea, no me digas, qué pena, qué horrible, qué vaina, te voy a decir una vaina, no te preocupes, no es para nada. ¿Qué más? ¿Qué más? That's one too. Estoy de acuerdo contigo. Yo no sé. Ojalá que sí. Me pasa lo mismo. I think I said that one already. But basically what I'm trying to do when I'm using filler words and filler phrases is just trying to fill in that empty void. So we are not just staring at each other while I am trying to think of something to say in Spanish, because nobody likes awkward silence, right? Also, make sure that you are actively listening. So I know this may seem quite obvious, but we want to make sure that we are paying attention to this other person. So not only to show that we are paying attention to them, but also so we can figure out what they are saying so we can ask our questions. Don't worry about making grammar mistakes or pronunciation mistakes when you're having conversations as well, because that is one big reason why you may not be having fluent Spanish conversations, because you keep stopping yourself after you make a mistake, or after making this grammar mistake or pronunciation mistake. One thing you may do is just reduce the amount that you are speaking, or just stop speaking completely because you feel so embarrassed. Now, this is what I have done many times as well. But trust me, you do not want to develop this habit because it can be quite challenging to get rid of it. So thinking too much about the mistakes that you are making can really break up the flow of the conversation. As well, guess what you are not doing anymore? you are not actively listening. So you're not listening very intently to this Spanish speaker that you are talking to. And you are only thinking about that mistake that you just made. All you have to do is just say what is on your mind and not try to be perfect when you are speaking, because really that is not the point. The point is to enjoy this conversation. Like, it's amazing to have conversations in Spanish with native Spanish speakers and learn from them, and also so they can learn from you. So don't let the mistakes that you are making stop this conversation or make you feel super embarrassed. Although, they can be embarrassing mistakes. I make them all the time. So just say what comes to your mind. Don't get too worried if you say ser versus estar or de versus del. Like when I was having conversations with my mechanic, I made plenty of mistakes, but I tried my best to not focus on those mistakes and just focus on what he was saying to me. And as you can see here, another big thing that contributes to having fluent Spanish conversations is dealing with your fear and your insecurities. How do you confront them? How do you manage them? How do you overcome them so you can have this nice conversation in Spanish? This, of course, is easier said than done. So that's why another tip that I have for you to have fluent Spanish conversations is to have many conversations in Spanish, which means pushing yourself and not having any more excuses, like I have had many in the past. So saying things like, oh, I just don't feel ready yet, or I don't have enough vocabulary, I just feel too embarrassed, I'm gonna make too many mistakes. You have to push through all those thoughts and all those feelings. And I understand that it can be very uncomfortable. Trust me, I know everything about being very uncomfortable during conversations in Spanish, because I've had many of them. And if you don't know me yet, I'm actually quite a timid person sometimes, and I'm an introvert. So for me to have a conversation with a Spanish speaker and to continue or to maintain a fluent Spanish conversation, it has always been very challenging for me, but I always push myself to do it and to be comfortable being uncomfortable. The thing is, many times these feelings of being uncomfortable and feeling very embarrassed just don't really go away like that. So you have to be in that conversation, even though you may feel very uncomfortable and embarrassed. And again, it feels very strange to do that, but that is what has helped me so much throughout the past few years. And the main reason why I have had so many conversations in Spanish, because I was in a conversation and I was still uncomfortable and I still felt pretty insecure. But on the bright side, many times I've had many conversations as well where I did have a lot of fear, I did have a lot of insecurity, but the more that I just focus on having that conversation, the more that I focus on asking questions and listening to that Spanish speaker and really wanting to know more about them, the less that I was thinking about my insecurities and my fear. So I hope these tips can help you have fluent Spanish conversations. Let me know in the comment section below if they do. Now watch this next video.